This man was the only fighter to ever scare UFC president Dana White.
Lee Murray is one of the most legit gangsters of all time.
He was a part of the biggest bank robbery in the history of Great Britain.
Got into a street fight with Tito Ortiz, knocked him out outside of a nightclub in the UK.
What?
They haven't told you about Lee Murray over there?
No.
From an MMA prodigy to masterminding a 53 million pound robbery, Lee Lightning Murray was the most dangerous man to ever be signed to the UFC.
I think they stole $80 million, something crazy like that. But these guys had full-on tactical gear, machine gun. He was fighting in the UFC while he was a full-on criminal.
But how did this gangster go from chasing a belt to being on the run from multiple federal agencies? To understand, we have to go back to November 12th, 1977. Lee Brahim Murray was born in South London to an English mother and Moroccan father. The streets of South London's council estates were plagued by constant crime and violence. His home offered no refuge from the violence. His father, Brahim Lamrani, was an unpredictable alcoholic whose involvement in Lee's life came in the form of brutal beatings that left lasting scars, both physical and psychological. The sound of his father's steps would make him freeze in fear, knowing the pain he was about to endure depended entirely on how badly his father's day had gone. But when Brahim abandoned his family, Lee thought the nightmare was finally over. Yet 7 years later, his father returned. But by then, Lee had grown into a towering 6'3" teenager with years of suppressed rage burning inside him. The moment Brahim raised his hand again, Lee's tolerance ran dry. He left his lifelong abuser unconscious on the floor. That night, Lee conquered his biggest fear and tasted power for the first time. But would this newfound strength save him or destroy him? He spent so much time away from home that he started leading the notorious gang, the Buttmarsh Boys. It was here that Lee's reputation for brutal street fighting spread like wildfire. His fighting style was raw, vicious, and effective. But this gang life came with an inevitable price. Murray found himself in juvenile detention at Feltham, Dover, and Norwich. Upon his release, Lee obsessed over his physicality, so he transformed his lanky frame with steroids and weight gainer shakes. Whatever he had left from his drug money was spent on flashy cars that screamed success, but whispered danger. But deep down, Lee knew this lifestyle wouldn't last forever. That's when everything changed. Lee's associate, Mark Epstein, had found a way out, mixed martial arts. But it wasn't Mark's leading example that would change Lee's trajectory. Instead, it was something more daunting. By pure luck, Lee avoided a massive drug bust that sent most of his friends to prison for years. It was then that Lee faced a terrifying reality. He was one decision away from a life sentence or a body bag. Watching his world crumble around him, Lee had only one person left to call. Although MMA started as an escape from the streets, Lee quickly discovered he possessed serious talent. Training became his obsession, replacing drug deals with gym sessions and channeling his rage into technique. But how does a street fighter do against professional fighters? December 5th, 1999. Lee is scheduled to fight in his MMA debut in the Millennium Brawl series. Lee's hands trembled as he taped his gloves. His face turned white as he walked to the cage. But as soon as the bell rang, he felt at home. 47 seconds later, Rob Hudson was unconscious on the canvas. The crowd erupted. They started calling him Lightning before he even left the cage. It was then that Lightning Lee Murray found his calling. So he dedicated his life to becoming the best martial artist he could be. Training at elite facilities like London Shoot Fighters and Pat Militich's legendary Iowa camp, Lee transformed from street brawler into a legitimate fighter. It wasn't long before his name rose in the MMA world as he demolished opponent after opponent. Yet his greatest moment of fame didn't come from competing, but instead from something unexpected. It was the night he allegedly knocked out the most feared man in mixed martial arts.
What happened in that street fight? What happened in that famous street fight?
Which one?
Lee Murray.
It's July 2002. UFC 38 had just concluded in London, and the sport's biggest stars were celebrating at China White, an exclusive West End nightclub. As closing time arrived, a massive fight broke out in the alley outside. In the chaos, Lee Murray found himself face to face with Tito Ortiz, the reigning UFC light heavyweight champion. What happened next would become MMA legend.
Well, there's a situation that I came walking out of a bar and one of my buddies getting beat up on, and I was defending him. And Lee Murray was in there. Lee Murray, he broke away. He started running away. I started chasing to him, and he turns around and stops and plants his feet. I go to stop and I slide right into him.
Ortiz threw the first punches and missed, but when Murray countered, he didn't. A devastating 5-punch combination dropped the champion to the pavement, with Murray even stomping Ortiz's head before getting pulled off. Word of multiple witnesses to this knockout spread like wildfire. The up-and-coming British fighter became an instant legend. This gossip drew so much drama that it even got Dana White's attention. 18 months later, Murray got one chance to prove if he was a one-hit wonder or a legit athlete. January 31st, 2004, UFC 46. Lee faced Jorge Rivera to headline his UFC debut. 47 seconds into the first round, Rivera was submitted via a triangle armbar. The crowd erupted as Murray's hand was raised, but this was just the beginning. The growing hype about him was lining him up for a super fight that the world wanted to see.
Tell us your thoughts on your former street fighting opponent, Tito Ortiz. Tito Ortiz? Tito Ortiz? I'll fight anybody. I don't care who they are.
But right at fingers' reach of cementing his legacy, Lee's visa to enter the US got revoked. It turns out that Lee was undergoing criminal prosecution back in the UK after assaulting another driver during a road rage incident. Legal issues kept him from returning to America, forcing him to stay in England and sign with Cage Rage for the time being. Ironically, his next opponent would turn out to be even more dangerous than Tito Ortiz. His name was Anderson Silva. Widely considered the greatest fighter of all time, Silva back then was an up-and-comer as well. This was before he joined the UFC, but still a talented fighter. While Anderson's other opponents crumbled under his pressure, Lee put up a bigger fight than Silva anticipated. For 3 rounds, Lee traded shots with the future legend, proving that his toughness can't be taught in any gym. Although Lee lost the fight, he gained the crowd's respect once more. But after what happened next, Lee would never be the same again. On September 28, 2005, a fight broke out at London's Funky Buddha nightclub. Attempting to protect boxing coach Terry Coulter during a knife attack, Murray suffered multiple stab wounds, including a punctured lung and severed artery. His heart stopped beating, and he had to be resuscitated 4 times, as well as requiring a massive blood transfusion.
I actually ran into Lee Murray right after he got stabbed. Right?
Well, he got stabbed in the heart, didn't he?
He got stabbed everywhere. It stabbed wounds all over him, and they were still fresh. Days after Lee Murray got stabbed, he's walking around an event with all the stitches still in him and everything still fresh. Murray's one of the most legit gangsters of all time. He really is.
After escaping death by millimeters, the extent of Lee's injuries put his professional competition dreams to rest. With no belt to chase, Murray had nothing to occupy his mind, and so his mind would soon become his worst opponent. In the darkness of his recovery, Lee Murray's mind began to wonder about how he would make money now. His fighting days were over, his body scarred beyond repair. But Lee had always been a strategist, and as he stared at his future, one target began to consume his thoughts: the Securitas Depot in Tonbridge, Kent. The fortress-like facility housed over £200 million in Bank of England sterling notes, protected by cameras, codes, and steel. For months, he studied, planned, and recruited through his vast MMA and street connections. But could a gang of fighters and street criminals pull off the impossible? It's February 21st, 2006. The plan Lee had obsessed over for months was about to unfold. At 6:30 p.m., driving a Volvo equipped with fake police lights, Lee and his crew disguised themselves as police officers when they pulled over depot manager Colin Dixon. Believing he was being lawfully detained, Dixon offered no resistance as they handcuffed him and threw him into a van. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew arrived at Dixon's home, convincing his terrified wife to go with them because Colin had been injured in a car accident. With his family held hostage and guns pointed at their heads, Dixon had no choice but to reveal every security code. Within 40 minutes, Lee's crew had loaded 53 million pounds into their truck, leaving behind another 154 million pounds they simply couldn't carry. But as the truck disappeared into the Kent countryside, Lee had no idea that a minor detail would become his ultimate downfall. For exactly 4 days, Lee Murray believed he had pulled off the perfect crime. But the first mistake came immediately after the heist. Instead of vanishing into the night, the gang returned to Elderton Farm to divide their 53 million pound prize. What should have been a moment of celebration became a forensic goldmine. Fingerprints, DNA, and witness testimony that would later seal their fate. Within hours of the heist, hundreds of officers were deployed in the most expensive investigation in British criminal history. The £2 million reward offered by Securitas transformed every criminal in London into a potential informant. As police began processing testimonies and evidence, Lee was already on a plane to Morocco, believing his dual nationality would protect him from British justice. Soon enough, the first domino fell when Michelle Hogg, the makeup artist who had crafted their perfect disguises, cracked under pressure. Facing serious charges, she made a deal with police that would expose Lee's identity. Her testimony provided investigators with all the names, faces, and connections they needed. By March 2006, the net was tightening fast. The nationwide manhunt had arrested 36 people and recovered 21 million pounds, but the masterminds remained at large. In his luxury villa near Rabat, Lee was living like a king, buying cars, throwing parties, and spending stolen millions as if the money would never run out. But 2,000 miles away, British authorities were building an airtight case that would soon reach across international borders. For months, Lee Murray enjoyed retirement in his Moroccan paradise, unaware that joint operations between Kent police and Moroccan authorities had been watching his every move since the day he stepped off the plane. They were simply waiting for the perfect moment to close the trap. June 25th, 2006. What Lee thought was a routine shopping trip to the mega mall in Rabat became the end of his freedom. Moroccan police surrounded him in broad daylight, arresting him and Paul Allen. Authorities had essentially handed over their entire case, intelligence, and evidence, giving Moroccan prosecutors everything they needed to ensure Lee would never see British soil again. In June 2010, Lee received a 10-year sentence that seemed almost generous considering he'd stolen 53 million pounds. But his decision to appeal months later would prove to be the most catastrophic mistake of his life. Instead of reducing his sentence, the Moroccan appeals court delivered a crushing blow: 25 years. As you watch this video, Lee Murray sits in Tifelt prison in northwestern Morocco, 19 years into his sentence. The man who once knocked out UFC champions now counts the days until his release in 2035. If you enjoyed this story, you don't want to miss out on this next one here. I'll see you there.